The hearing on Interior in the subcommittee will come to order. And welcome, Secretary Haaland, and welcome to Denise Flanagan. So good to have you with us, and to our colleagues and to our constituents. Today's hearing will review the Department of Interior's fiscal year 2023 budget request. And before I get started, I just wanted to highlight that during this session of Congress, the subcommittee, after a conversation that we have had with I've had with Senator Merkley, we have forgone the plastic water bottles that you see at hearings all across Capitol Hill. And I mention that simply because plastic is becoming an issue that the department is dealing with, that America is dealing with, that the world is dealing with, because it is impacting our lands, our oceans, our wildlife, even our own bodies. And because, Secretary Haaland, under your leadership, the Interior Department is taking steps to address the issue of plastic pollution. And last month you signed a secretarial order to phase out single-use plastics on public lands, and really want to thank you for that effort. Lays out a 10-year plan. I encourage you to consider whether there's a way for it to be a plan that takes less than a decade, given the significance of plastics on public lands. But the fact is that you've taken very significant action, and I applaud that. Turning to the American landscape, I want to start with wildfires that are absolutely devastating to many of our western states. Compared to this time last year, 4 times as many acres have burned in this year, 2022. And it's not just the fires and their impact on the forest, but it's also the enormous risk to our communities and to our citizens, the massive amount of smoke and air pollution that they produce. I will never forget the 2020 Labor Day fires in Oregon, where I traveled some 600 miles back and forth across the state, never getting out of the smoke, and seeing 6 communities absolutely burned to the ground, and then meeting with what became thousands of citizens that had lost their homes, lost everything, and communities that were just absolutely obliterated, and it's so challenging to restore the lives, restore the communities. So fire is a big deal for America. It's a big deal for the Department of Interior, and I'm very pleased that as chair of this subcommittee, I was able to work with colleagues on the bipartisan infrastructure bill that provided $20 billion of appropriated funds to Department of Interior programs for programs within this subcommittee's jurisdiction, and specifically $2.5 billion over 10 years to invest in wildfire risk reduction and ecosystem restoration, including funds for fuel breaks, for hazardous fuels projects, reduce the amount of fuels in the forest, prescribed fires, and burned area restoration. Another effort that we've undertaken is to provide funding for the training of National Guard members to be able to assist and become fire crews when we are in desperate need of additional fire crew members. This has been an important undertaking. Those crews have been very valuable, and it's something that we're working to continue. At this point, more than 1,000 personnel have been trained, and I know that as we continue to fund this program, train many more. I was struck a couple weeks ago in conversations, meetings about this fire season, that there is great difficulty in filling out the crews that are needed. And that effort to have the National Guard members provide additional support makes a lot of sense. The final fiscal year 22 Interior bill funded 5 forest collaboratives across Oregon, increased the ability to do these landscape restoration projects that provide trees to the mill and jobs in the forest and healthier forests and forests that are more fire resilient. And for the first time, we created a program to specifically address public health impacts of wildfire smoke. It's critical that the department use all its resources and tools at its disposal, including tribal co-management, interagency agreements, like the Western Oregon Operating Plan, and forest and rangeland collaboratives to get this funding on the ground and put it to work protecting our communities. While I'm pleased with these accomplishments, I recognize that the fiscal year 22 budget deal did not address all the urgent challenges that your department faces. Urgent challenges in climate chaos and loss of biodiversity, significant staffing shortages, to mention a few. And I'm disappointed that the final deal continued to include some legacy policy riders that harm the environment, like the sage-grouse rider that prevents U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from employing the best possible science in terms of the survival of that species. But the final fiscal year 22 bill included a lot to be proud of. In addition to wildfire risk reduction, we increased funding for national monuments planning. We secured $10 million to construct a voting rights center, the Selma Interpretive Center, to honor the legacy of civil rights leaders, including the late Representative John Lewis. We funded $7 million for the Indian boarding school initiative that I will be asking more about and really applauding today. And we stopped the bleeding by halting the backslide of staffing levels for programs that promote clean water, protect our public lands, and conduct critical environmental research. And I want to thank you, Secretary Haaland, for the Department's efforts to push completion of a resource management plan for the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument, a plan that is really needed for the expanded monument. I know you're making very significant progress on that, and I'm just encouraging you to keep that process going forward with all due momentum. It'll be a day to celebrate when we have that final resource management plan. And I want to thank you and the department for the wonderful success of the Monarch Summit that we held together last month. I've got my Monarch pin on, and I'll be getting you one as well. And bringing experts together for 2 days to really address this enormous collapse of the monarch population and all its implications was really generated so much energy that you could just sense the excitement in the room that effort was highlighting some very significant issues that need to be highlighted. We're going to have a set of proposals that come out of that. But I just wanted to put up this chart for the decline of the western monarch. We see that in the year 2020, we had less than 2,000 monarchs. That's less than 0.005% of the numbers that we had back in the 1990s. This is catastrophic. We've had a slight rebound, a very good year last year, a slight rebound but we're still less than 1% of the western monarchs. And I've been to Pismo Beach. I've seen the overwintering grounds in California. Actually, it's a whole several hundred sites along the coast where they gather to avoid freezing over the winter. We discovered some very important things in the summit. For example, that climate change is affecting survival because it's upsetting the timing of when the overwintering monarchs leave the coast and the time that the milkweed comes out of the ground on which they lay their eggs. And we found out that the challenge with the milkweed that we might acquire in our nurseries is that it's contaminated with pesticides that can actually kill monarchs. And so we have to have a pesticide-free milkweed production. There's a tremendous amount that came out of that. We have to address this. And this actually isn't just about the monarchs. It's about pollinators in general that play such an essential role in our ecosystem. So thank you so much for collaborating on that, and I'll look forward to maintaining the momentum on the ideas that come out of that meeting. So let me switch to a broader question of climate change. I know that President Biden has publicly advocated for a paradigm shift on how we manage our public lands and waters for energy development, but in practice what we've been seeing is an all-the-above approach, an approach that will not boldly address our climate challenge. And that involves both addressing the demand and the supply of fossil fuels. And we are definitely at a point where business as usual doesn't work. we've just talked about the fires, but there's so much more going on in my home state, the loss of the snowpack, the acidification of the oceans. Everywhere we look, we're being impacted by these changes in a very, very harmful way. It's affecting our fishing, it's affecting our farming, it's affecting our forests. And so I want to encourage the department to do all in its power to boldly address climate. And so just to express some of my concerns, the department's long-awaited analysis of federal oil and gas leasing did not incorporate or address climate change. The department has defended environmental impact statements that do not contemplate climate change, statements that have been rejected by the courts subsequently as inadequate. The administration put forward the largest lease of drilling rights in the Gulf of Mexico in U.S. history, a sale that was also halted by a court challenging the environmental impact statement. The department may have been legally required to offer a sale, but it wasn't legally required to offer a massive sale. And I know you and I have spoken about other aspects of where I think the department can really work to try to boldly address climate as we look at energy resources. And earlier this month, the department released a 5-year plan for offshore drilling. It highlights a range of leasing options, including a no leasing option. There is nothing in the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act that requires offering these leases. And I urge you to choose the no lease option in your final plan. In Oregon, we are terrified of the impact on our ocean resources. Our salmon, our crabbing, our shrimp, just a whole range of critical ocean resources, and we're very, very concerned about the potential impacts of a disaster on our shoreline, our coastal communities. Oil washing up on the shores would be absolutely devastating. And we simply must adopt more of a keep-it-in-the-ground perspective since we are at this tipping point of the devastating impacts of climate change on our states. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in its 2021 report used the term, or it called it a code red for humanity, and massing evidence of the catastrophic changes that we're experiencing. In American lingo, we would call this a 5-alarm fire. Record-setting global temperatures year after year, catastrophic wildfires, increasing frequency and severity of storms causing devastating impacts on lands and people, large-scale flooding that heavily damaged Yellowstone National Park is an example, cost millions to repair. Oceans 30% more acidic, impacting our sea life, the fishing industry, and our fishing communities. Droughts devastating the livelihoods of our farmers and our ranchers. And we have, in addition to carbon dioxide that's all talked about, we have the challenge of fossil gas. Methane, we refer to it in public as natural gas. It is methane gas, it is fossil gas. And this chart shows what the eye sees when it looks at a facility, which you can't see any visible emissions. And then when you have, I think it's infrared photography, you see there's a massive plume of methane being emitted. And I will put into the record, if there's no objection, a chart that shows satellite data, massive number of examples like this from across the country that are being observed. And as we get better satellite data, we're getting a far better understanding of the massive leaks. The estimate right now in the Permian Basin is 10% of the fossil gas is leaked into the atmosphere, making it worse than coal in terms of the impact on climate. So, thank you for hearing me out on my concerns about the bold pivot we need to make. The administration can do a lot, and I encourage bold action. Now, we may hear something today about the high gas prices and the need for more drilling. So I just wanted to share a few comments about that. It's like a heroin addict saying that the solution to heroin addiction is more heroin. Let's recognize several basic facts. The prices we're experiencing are extremely painful to Americans. They're devastating. They are primarily the result of disruption from Putin's war on Ukraine and the resulting embargo on Russian energy in combination with the rising demand as the economy rebounds from COVID. And these prices are also the result of gouging by the oil companies, which have tripled their profit margins from refining. Let's also recognize the oil companies own leases that will allow them to drill on 20 million additional acres of federal land and water that they are not using. If oil companies want to drill more, they already can. Next, that the timeline for building out new infrastructure will not have any impact on the current cost of gas because of that long timeline that it takes. And that the answer in the long term to the high cost of petroleum at the pump is an end to our addiction to that petroleum by rapidly building a renewable energy economy. If we want to stop enriching Russia and Iran, if we want to reduce the price we suffer at the pump, then we need to end our addiction to fossil fuels. Madam Secretary, you have enormous responsibilities that are so important to our lands and the future of this country. I know you are absolutely dedicated to that efforts. We'll explore many of that through the questions today, and I really appreciate your service. With that, let me turn this over